Hello, all you beautiful gamers and game makers. You are listening or watching, consuming. No, that's not right. You're enjoying Audio XP, my game audio video podcast. I don't know why that's so hard to describe to people, but yes, it's a video podcast about game audio. I'm your host, Cole Harmon. There are millions of things you could be watching right now, but you chose this. So for that, I thank you. I have an incredible guest lined up for you today. It's Nathan Madsen. He's the lead audio director over at Unbroken Studios, but he also does a ton of freelance work. He's worked on everything, literally from Dragon Ball to Lego. He's worked on slot games and indie games, AAA games, you name it. He's done it. So really excited to show you the fun chat that I had with him. But before we dive into that, I wanted to make you aware of something really cool. Recently, I stumbled across this really cool library from a friend, Zach Egan, and he made a free sound library of just like wild sci-fi sweeteners and power-up sounds, so you definitely got to check it out. But instead of hearing about it from me, I'm going to turn it over to him for a sec so you can hear about this super cool library.
Hey everyone, Zach here, and I'm very excited to share that my brand new sound effects pack, Fractured, is available right now. I created this library by recording some source materials such as paper grocery bags and swirling glasses, did a bunch of processing, and came up with some pretty interesting sci-fi textures. I think this library would work really well for creating stylistic magic spells or anything futuristic that just needs extra energy. And the best part is that this library is absolutely free, so head on over to my website right now and grab that download today. Thank you so much for checking this out. I hope that this library helps you. If you enjoyed the sounds or find them useful, let me know. I would love to hear from you. Later.
Yeah, I know. Sounds super legit and it's free. So just check out the links in the description. I'll put it down below. Oh, my hands are all ghosty. Sorry, ADD brain there. Anyway, lastly, before I jump in with Nate here, I just wanted to point out one quick thing. Some people were confused by my first episode. I was talking to Jasmine, the sound designer, but featuring music from Sock Puppet. So when I interview a sound designer on this show, I will definitely throw in lots of clips of their work and stuff like that. But as far as like the music of the podcast, I'm going to try to find a new composer each week to feature their music because I really want to just promote people. I love sharing the love. I love giving people a shout out. But today is going to be a little different because Nate is both a sound designer and a composer. So everything you're going to hear from him today is from him. So with that in mind, let's jump into my fun conversation with Nate Madsen over at Unbroken Studios. What, you don't like the wink? I don't know. I just started this podcast. I'm trying to figure out my host mannerisms. Do you go by Nate or Nathan?
I go by both, but lately it's been a lot more Nate. So like a quick story about that. We can start with this too,
sure.
if you want.
Yeah.
Is my family, my wife, like close friends call me Nate. Like when you first meet me, it's Nathan. You become friends, it's Nate. So back when I started at SciPlay in 2016, I was doing the onboarding paperwork, and I just decided, you know what? Instead of putting Nathan, I'm just going to put Nate on my employee information sheet. And so everyone started calling me Nate from day one because that's what they saw in the paperwork. And instantly, people just felt like my close friend from day one. It was kind of a cool thing. I just did it on the spur of the moment. There was no pre-thought or plan. So I go by both. I'm really fine with either. But yeah, you can call me Nate. You can call me Nathan. Doesn't matter.
Perfect. Yeah, I didn't know if it was going to be like Mr. Madsen, Professor Madsen.
No. Good
Nate,
God, no.
Nate Dog, whatever you prefer.
People do call
I'm
me
sure
Nate
they do.
Dog.
I'm sure you get that a lot. I'm really excited to have you on the show. You're actually the very first person I thought of when I started the show. I was like, I really want to have you on for a lot of reasons, but I'll tell you kind of how I came to know about you is after 2020, things were a little crazy, and same with me. And I was just kind of at this weird crossroads in my life where I had spent my whole life doing one thing, and I kept thinking like, I think I want to get into game development. I don't know. It's a huge turn of the ship, and I have a family and all this stuff. But I don't know about you, but I believe in science, and I was working at a video game store at the time, and I kept getting only me. This only happened to me at the store, and we had like 40 stores in this company. I kept getting this little game on DS called Ninja Town. And
gosh. Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
And like every time I'd open a box, we'd all get a box to like clean games, fresh shipments or whatever. And I would keep getting this Ninja Town game. And so that wasn't really that big of a deal until I started looking into like, okay, well, what does a game composer actually do? I don't really know. I'm going to just research this. And then I came across an interview with you where you were telling somebody about how you worked on Ninja Town. And I was like, oh, wow, ding. And so I just started looking at your website, looking at your videos, and quickly you became somebody that I really look up to and admire.
Well, thank you.
Because really you have a very unique and interesting career that I want to ask you a lot about. But you've worked full-time in the industry. You've done a ton of freelance projects. You have a family. You're obviously seem like a very healthy and normal person with an actual life, and yet you do all this stuff. So I'm just like really thankful for you, because I honestly I think, okay, if this guy can do it, then I can figure out how to get there too. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh man, well, that means a lot, Cole. Thank you. Absolutely. By the way, just a caveat for you and your listeners, I might be clearing my throat quite a bit here. Apologies for that. Fall in Texas just gets me hard with allergies, so I'll try to keep it to a minimum if I do, but that's why.
Okay.
But no, that's so gratifying to hear, because I think having heroes, and I'm not trying to be presumptuous and say I'm a hero of yours. I'm just saying having someone that you admire or having a milestone you're looking at is such a good thing, because it gives you a landmark or a target to aim for. And I have that in my own life, and I've had that many times, several different people. So it means a lot. It's very it honors me a great deal to hear that, to hear you say that. And Ninja Town, so I didn't work on Ninja Town itself. I worked on Ninja Town Trees of Dune, the iPhone game.
Right.
There was a follow-up to that. But Ninja Town itself, the DS game, first off, for anyone who hasn't played it, that's listening, go grab it if you have a DS. It's such a fun top-down RTS game. It's really cute. And you may have heard this in the interview I told the other person that you referenced earlier, but I got that from a really good friend of mine I'm still friends with. In fact, our sons and we all swam together just this past weekend. They gave it to me as a joke one year for Christmas. And they even had like the receipt like taped on the inside, and they were like, you can totally take it back to GameStop and get something that you really want to play. But something about it, I was like, I laughed. I thought it was funny, but I was like, I'll try it. And I liked it so much that they all bought copies. They saw me playing it all the time on my DS, that they grabbed copies and they fell in love with the game. And then, long story made sort of short, is I reached out to the company, Venom Entertainment, which has sadly closed down now. Mm-hmm. But I reached out to them and the CEO and said, I loved what you did with Ninja Town. I'm a huge fan. I'm a composer, sound designer, and if you ever have a need, I'd love to work with y'all. And he wrote me back, and he was like, hey, I get a lot of these kind of emails, a lot of kind of inquiries like this, but something about yours made me stop and go listen to your stuff. And yeah, let's work together. And that led to me working on Ninja Town, which was such a fun thing to do.
Yeah, actually, in preparation for this interview, I tried to see if I could snag a copy anywhere, but unfortunately, it's vaporware at this point, because it's not on iOS anymore and all that. Do you have like an old iPhone with it anywhere or something like that?
I have, I think I have it on an old iPad. And what's funny too is, and I don't know a lot about this, but it seems like as the chips in the iOS hardware gets faster and faster, older apps, if they don't know to accommodate for that, they just run at a faster frame rate because everything's so much faster. Because I've had a couple of older games I've worked on that, like, same thing, didn't get updated. I happen to have an old hardware that's running on newer software, and everything's just like blah, 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 it's just going super fast. And that was happening with Ninja Town a little bit, but no, I have it on a device or two because I've actually played it a few times here and there. So yeah,
nice. But that's really cool. It's kind of an interesting point of connection that game also spoke to you. I forgot to tell you the kind of the weird part is, like, after my wife and I moved out to Washington State, in large part for me to pursue game development. I went to a comic book shop in a small town, and I was just looking to see what games they had. They only had one DS game. It was Ninja Town. I thought, what the heck?
Gosh, it's just following you around.
But
That's
I've never
amazing.
seen that game anywhere else in my life. It was just like this weird thing where it was following me around. So have a game I'd like to play. And so I think it'd be really fun. I asked you to prepare a sound, and I've also prepared a sound. And I think we should spend a quick minute just kind of listening and trying to see if you can, guess how I made it and vice versa.
Okay, let me download this. Are you ready?
Yep.
I'm going to listen to it. Okay, it's like a low guttural growl sound that fades in. Okay, to me, and I was so nervous about this, to be honest. I was like, I'm probably going to suck at this. But my ears, what I'm thinking is it sounds like either like a desk drawer or a drawer itself, or like a closet that is, it sounds wooden and it sounds pitched down and slowed down, and then some reverb added to it. So that's kind of what I'm hearing.
You are very, very close, actually. That's great. You have a great ear, obviously.
Thank you.
So basically, this was for the sound design showdown that I'm a part of. And we were doing Mariana's Trench. So I was like, well, I want to do a big monster. And I have wood floors and I have wood chairs.
Okay.
And if you just ever so slightly rub it on the floor, it makes this horrible groaning sound. So yeah,
awesome.
I did a lot. I made a little library of emotive chair groans and chopped and screwed it. But the other layer, that like throaty kind of bubbly layer, because it's underwater, is actually a can of soup that I took a few different clips and made a very rhythmic track, and then did some peak following, like the peak following modulation there, and then I just used like a preset on ROM that I found called Foreign Voice that gives it a really growly kind of thing. And I just did a bunch of layers of that, and I thought it turned out pretty all right. So
yeah, that's awesome. That's great.
All right, I'll listen to yours now.
So I teach an interactive game audio course at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. I do this remotely every Monday night for 3 hours. And last fall was my first semester doing that. I'm doing it again this fall. And so one of the projects I did with my students last year was a sound recreate. There's the Marshall McGee YouTube series where he goes through and he points out like an iconic sound. For example, he did the axe recall from God of War 4. And so he plays the sound and he deconstructs it and shows how to recreate that sound. But what I love about it was he only uses his cell phone as a mic. And so one thing I do with my students last fall, and I'm going to do with this current class in the coming weeks, is they're going to use only their cell phone as their microphone, and then just anything around their house, anything around their where they live, whatever, vehicles, whatever they want to use. Pick an iconic sound and then recreate it using your phone as the mic. And then you can bring it into whatever DAW you want to use and produce it to your heart's content. So this is what I did. I can go ahead and tell everyone, there's a poison dart gun from BioShock Infinite. I really liked the way it sounded. I liked using the gun a lot in that game. So the first clip, you're going to hear, obviously, there's going to be music and there's going to be dialogue and reaction that's not in my recreate, because my recreate is just the gun sound itself. So you're going to hear the original first, then you hear my version.
What'd you say?
The steam, the poison it sounds like steam to me. So if you didn't do just like white noise or whatever, I would be inclined to say some sort of way you got that with cooking, because I don't know, like I've made like steam buns and stuff where I've gotten like a nice little hissing sound. I'm not really sure about that one. I feel like there's a few different ways you could approach that. I don't know. It sounds like a canister, even of whipped cream, possibly. The other thing, the reload has a slight kind of small metallic object sound to me. So I wonder if it was like some small piece of metal you found in your drawer and were clinking it, and then just the way you placed it kind of made it work for the gun. Yeah, that's pretty much all I got. I would say, did you use like some kind of CO2 canister or something?
You're really close in a lot of different ways. What Cole's seeing is, like, I sent him a chat where it lists everything out. So the hissing, the poison was a Dr. Pepper can. And of course I had to drink it after I was done. But I did two things. One, I just opened it, and that metallic sound was useful, but also just the of it coming out was great. And then also just pouring over ice and just seeing how I could manipulate that bubbling over the carbonation was really useful. And then for your listeners, I have a stapler in here. It's not red. It's not like Office Space. It's a blue stapler. But I opened and closed it, and I actually just stapled a couple of things. And then my youngest son is fascinated with Nerf guns. So he has two different Nerf guns. I just brought them in and cocked them and fired them a whole bunch of times. And I have a baby gate right over here that was originally keeping the kids out of my office, but now it's keeping our puppy out of my office. Yeah. So I unlocked it and locked it and set it. I have my kid has a Millennium Falcon, so I use that. And then so there's an action when the dart gun shoots and it swings that little like a string forward and it shoots the dart. So I to get that, I had a plastic hanger that I just swung in front of my phone just multiple times to try and get the right type of swing. And I had resistance bands that were supposed to be for exercise, but they just sit in my garage. And I got those out and twanged them a whole bunch of times to try and get the right type of twang. I did some mouth hissing. And then that metal sound you talked about, you're really close to that. I dabble in guitar, and I dabble in like ukulele and mandolin. Okay. So I did some guitar latches. That's all that was guitar latches. And then finally some impact sounds was like fridge and oven and dishwasher opening and closing. And then honestly, my webcam on my desk, I just hit my hand down several times recording computer audio and just seeing what it would sound like going through the surface of everything and just hearing this big thud. And it actually worked pretty well. So I did a whole bunch of layers for this. And honestly, it was my first time doing a sound recreate. I'd seen these videos all over and they're fun, but I'd never done one. So I told my students when I gave the assignment last year, hey, I'm going to do this with y'all. And we all did it together. And it was a lot of fun. So I hope that's okay. I didn't know what to bring because I wanted to avoid, I just got this sound from a stock library, or I grabbed this from a library and produced it a little bit. Like I wanted to have something that showed actual Foley that I'm doing myself. So that's why I picked that one.
No, that was great. Actually, now hearing you say that, I can now hear that, especially the Nerf gun. That makes sense. Yeah, the Dr. Pepper, that's pretty good. That's a good trick. I like that.
And it was tasty too. And I did it in the afternoon, so I was like, it was the perfect time.
Yeah. I've been just kind of checking out your LinkedIn profile, and it's like many people I know in the game industry, it doesn't necessarily seem like a straight line into what you're doing right this minute, which is,
Absolutely.
I believe you're full-time at Unbroken, right?
Yes.
Cool.
Yeah.
So the first thing I saw in there was music teacher, and then something about Funimation and SciPlay and where you are now. So can you kind of give us just a little bit of a overview of like, how did you go from music teacher to game development?
Yeah. No, I definitely can. So yeah, I was a school teacher. I got my undergrad in K through 12 instrumental music, and I'm certified to teach. Well, I was not anymore, but I could be recertified easily to teach K through 12 instrumental. And I got my grad degree in saxophone performance with a strong emphasis in composition. So I started as a band director, and I thought that's what I want to do with my life. I had a wonderful student teaching experience being a student teacher in Oklahoma, teaching at Carl Albert High School. And I loved it. So I thought, this is what I'm going to do with my life. This is going to be great. And this is not to disparage teachers, because I think teachers are super vital and important. And I actually love teaching, but either that time in my life or that topic or that age group or all the three at the same time, it was not the right fit for me. And I knew about 3 weeks into my first teaching job, I don't want to do this forever. So it became this soul searching, like, well, I either need to get happy and figure out how to do this and like this be my life.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like what you're talking about, that like introspective moment, you're coming to a crossroads. I either need to accept this and be happy and be functional, or I need to make a change and make it to something that hopefully will make me happy. And so I had always been a gamer since first grade. I've always been in music. My family and my mom's side, super duper musical. And so I thought, well, maybe I could combine both of these passions. I love playing video games. I love writing music. I would love to be a composer. Maybe I could do both. For me, it took being in the workforce for real and doing it every single day and saying, this will be your next 30 or 40 years of your life if you like it, you know. It took that to really be, okay, I'm going to try and make a change. I'm going to move over to this other thing. And I made a website, and I was coming from zero. Like, I didn't have a family member or a friend that, hey, I'm over at Konami, and hey, you write some music, I'll give them your demo. Like, there was no connections for me. It was just, I'm a fan and I want to do this. So made a website, made a demo reel, very like rudimentary beginner demo reel, and just started shopping it around. And I thought, you know what? If I just give a shot and try this, maybe it'll work out. And if it doesn't, I tried. And that's really all I can ask for. And I got very lucky. And within the first year, I landed a few small projects. Now, this is 2005. So it's 2 years prior to working in like the iPhone, which was changed everything. And it really opened up a lot more fields, a lot more doors and pathways for people. So 2005 was like working in HTML projects, Flash-based projects. I landed a very small scale Nintendo DS project with a local developer. That was fun. But, you know, it was just a whole lot of small projects. And I was so excited to be working and to be doing it. I wasn't making very much money, but it wasn't about the money at the point. It was about the opportunity. And so I was just grabbing it with everything I could. And I didn't have any kids, so I had a very understanding wife who was like, hey, yeah, spend your nights and spend your weekends working on this stuff. Because she could tell how happy it made me, how much happier. And you talked about signs earlier, like with Ninja Town being everywhere in your life. For me, you know, it's just kind of ironic that like a year to the day, October 25th, 2005 until October 25th, 2006, that was my first day working at Funimation. So it took 1 year of just working on the side and looking around, and then I was able to find an opportunity and begin working in-house for Funimation.
You have no chance against me.
You can do this! I won't fail!
Funimation was a huge just bouncing off or launching off point for me that I didn't even fully recognize at the time. I am not a huge anime fan, but
Okay.
I like some of it.
Yeah.
But for me, looking back, that was such a great way to start because, I mean, I was 6 months into my career and I'm getting to write music for a Dragon Ball Z trailer or Yu-Gi-Oh! Or Full Metal Alchemist or all those case closed, big top tier animes that people recognize. And I was like, I was very happy to be there and excited. But looking back, I could not have picked a better way to start because I think that really helped me when I was going to NetDevil, when I was going to SciPlay, or eventually Unbroken. To have those kind of titles on my resume helped me get bigger projects down the road. Whereas if I was working on, Bob's video game or, Susan's cooking simulator, like something that no one's heard of, that may not have the same weight or resonance. And so I count my lucky stars that Funimation was A, local to me, it was in town, and then B, I just happened to come along when they had an opening and I did an interview and I did an audio test and I got the job. So I worked at Funimation for almost 2 years, then went to NetDevil, worked as a lead composer sound designer for Lego Universe, Jumpgate Evolution, and also Fortune Online. And then after NetDevil, I did freelancing for 5 years, just full time.
Okay.
And then after that, SciPlay. Or actually, I'm skipping a game studio, Bee Cave Games here in Austin. That's what brought me back to Texas. And all my family's here, and all my wife's family is here. And so we came back to Texas, worked at Bee Cave Games for about 11 months. Then the CEO came in and said, we're out of cash. And so we all were out of jobs. And then SciPlay hired me. Same kind of thing, casino, virtual gambling type of thing, which I'll touch on that in just a second. But did that I worked at SciPlay for 5.5 years, learned a tremendous amount, became their principal composer, sound designer. Still have a lot of friends I talk to every day just about at that studio. And after 5.5 years, I was really ready to work on something that I wanted to play. Because truth be told, I'm not a gambler myself. It's no judgment there. It's just if I have a 5-minute break, I'm not going to pick up a slot game to play. I'm going to play, Clash of Clans or Clash Royale. I'm going to play Rocket League. I'm going to play NBA 2K. I'm going to play something else, not that. And so I was very lucky to start looking around, and I found Unbroken, and I had a friend of mine that I knew there. And so I was able to just kind of get connected and start talking, do the whole thing, audio test, all that stuff, and then land it. So that's the progress I went. And it took 17 years, almost 18 years to get from school teacher to where I am now. A little bit of advice or a little bit of encouragement to your listeners is the initial launching point took a year to get me full-time in-house. And I could have been very, very lucky. I think I was in that situation. But it's not impossible to go, okay, I'm going to make this change. And then a year later, you might be working in-house at a game studio. You never know. So,
yeah, man.
But yeah, that's kind of the Cliff Notes version of it.
It's kind of mind-blowing to me. I look at your website and I see, I think the last time I checked, it was like 1,100 projects. I mean,
yeah.
So even as you're working in these companies full-time, you're still doing freelance this whole time, right?
Yes, and I've been very, very fortunate in that. So, every company I've worked for has allowed freelancing or moonlighting with a couple of the normal standard caveats of, hey, don't do it in company time and don't do it in company gear and don't compete with what we're making, all those kinds of things. And that's totally fair. And so, like, for example, with SciPlay, when I was working there, let me backtrack just a little bit. 2020 was a weird year for a lot of people. And unfortunately, it was really hard to see. A lot of people struggled with work to get work. 2020 for me was about the busiest I've ever been. And to the point where I was like, I bit off more than I could chew. I was working SciPlay full time. And then I was finishing up SkateBIRD, which, by the way, if I move just a little bit, I've got the skateboard deck right there on my shelf.
Awesome.
I was finishing up the soundtrack for SkateBIRD, and I also did a little bit of sound design for that game. And then Great Wolf Lodge reached out to me, and I knew a friend from my from my NetDevil days, and he said, "Hey, I need a composer sound designer," and he brought me on to do all of it for their Magi Quest Resort feature.
Ah, it worked! You are a Magi! And if you healed me, then maybe you can heal Valara too. Go to Gleaming Gardens and find Springbuck. Maybe she knows why the Shimmer Tree has gone dark. Good luck, Magi!
And so originally all this was supposed to launch in the April-May time of 2020. And I remember looking at the schedule and looking at the task load and being like, I'm going to die. I'm going to die. There's no other way. Fortunately, the way everything COVID kind of pushed back some of the manufacturing for the resort job, which pushed us back a little bit. SkateBIRD had a couple of delays too. So everything kind of just spaced out. And I was like, thank goodness, because even with that, I was working about 5 to 6 nights until about 11 or midnight every night on freelancing. And then at least a couple hours on Saturday and Sunday just to make everything happen. And I got through it, thank God. But I've been very fortunate, to answer your question, to be able to freelance. And I also am very glad that every studio I've worked for sees it as I think some studios make mistakes saying you can't work for anyone else but us, because a lot of times these folks are trying to find something different that's going to stretch them and teach them and grow them. And then they're going to take that additional learning back to their day job, and it's going to make them better and more enriching for that position. Versus, no, you can only do this. If I was only doing slot dev, which is, working in virtual casinos my entire time at SciPlay, then there's certain things that I wouldn't have been able to bring that company and say, I have some outside experience. I think we can do this or this or this, which helped enrich the company when I was there. Yeah, and that's another way how I got to that ridiculous number, which, by the way, I wasn't counting it. It's one of those things where to count it, I just put all my credits into a spreadsheet. And then I did the math there, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's a lot. And some of these are really small, and some of these are really big. It's not like every project's like a 5-year project. I would be 900 years old or something.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, so you've been working full-time and moonlighting, and you have a family, and you teach, and you're very active on social media. You do things like interviews. How do you manage it all? What does a day in the life look like for you?
Oh, that's a good question. Lots and lots of illegal drugs. No, I'm teasing. No, one of the things that I do take very seriously, I like to joke around a lot, but one of the things I take very seriously is the notion of, well, let me say it this way. Starting the way I started, where I was a school teacher, and I mentioned earlier, my very gracious, understanding wife allowed me to work nights and weekends. I started this job, game audio, doing it on the side and having to squeeze in some hours of creativity wherever I could find time, right? And so that's a skill all by itself. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people don't remember or forget that, or don't really give that the focus it needs. And so the reason why I've always kept freelancing all this time is I really like it. It lets me do something totally different from my day job. The extra money is great. I always think about, this could lead to something else. Who knows? But then I also think about kind of like an athlete. Okay, I I'm a major Dallas Mavericks fan. Luka Doncic and that whole team. I like to watch them as much as I can, and I just love the Dallas Mavericks. And Luka, in particular, I mean, he's a generational talent. He's just one of those like one in a million type of players. You watch him, by the way, he kind of moves slow. Like some certain players move super fast on the court. He's kind of a slow player, but he moves in such a way and controls everything around him that they can't really get to him. And he just kind of clumsily and sometimes gets to the basket and scores. I mean, it's amazing to watch. But what I love about him is he plays during the summer, during the off season. And of course, they have their whole training and all that stuff leading up to the NBA season. And then he plays during the NBA season. They finish that season, and then he goes back to, I forget where it's like Slovenska or something like that. So I'm probably butchering the name of it, but he goes over to Europe and plays in his hometown, his home team, again during their season, and then goes back to the NBA and plays. He's playing all the time. He's leveling up his game all the time. And so that's the way I feel like about this. I do talk to creatives. I do talk to folks that sometimes I teach or work with, and they'll say, I just don't feel creative today, so I'm not going to work today. That's a very foreign thought and mentality for me. And that's not to say I'm 100% creative all the time. I'm not. I have days where I'm like, everything I'm doing sucks today. I have those. But I have the mantra of you have to get through the bad times in the studio where there's just the deserts, the dry spells. Nothing is working here. You push through that and you treat it like an 8-hour day. Because then the next day, you never know, you might come in and just have a gem just go pink right there. And you wouldn't get to it without the 8 hours of previous work. And it has to be work. And I feel like some folks have this notion, for whatever reason, oh, I create when I'm inspired. And I can't remember who wrote it, but there's a famous quote from an author saying, I write when my muse is here, and my muse arrives every day at 9 o'clock in the morning when I shut the door and I begin work. I 100% buy that. You have to spend the time. And so my long story, is that's the way I feel about freelancing and doing my day job is it keeps me sharp. I have to keep learning new things. I have to keep pushing myself. When I was working with Magi Quest, Great Wolf Lodge, that was Unity. So I was learning Unity. And that helped level me up when I was working at SciPlay. And then working for Unbroken, I'm learning Unreal. And now I'm teaching and working in Unreal. So it's always leveling up. And so that's why I do all the freelancing that I do, is because I just want to stay sharp and I enjoy the creativity. And when I come in here, it's not dusting off the cobwebs and trying to remember, what is it like to be creative? I feel like, hey, I did this yesterday. I'm going to do this today. I'm going to do it tomorrow. I'm going to do it the next day. I'm just going to stick to it. This is what I do. So that's why I do so much freelancing on top of it.
That's a really awesome answer.
Thank you.
I feel the same way. I mean, I'm like, I have the time. I'm not going to get this time later. This is my creative time. Whether I feel it or not, like I'm going to make something. And a lot of times I do end up throwing that, whatever it was, away. But, sometimes, it's like, I don't know if you ever do this, though. I will sometimes, though, if I'm having, like, a specific assignment and it's just not clicking, I'll be like, fine, I'm just going to make weird noise just to see if anything happens, I'm just going to try to make the most horrible sound I can because something just kind of happens when you do stuff like that. But
I love it. Yeah, that's great. It reminds me a little bit of, making weird noises, or sometimes just doing a polar opposite of what you should be working on. If you're working on death metal and you're just like, this is going nowhere, I'm going to write a lullaby. And you start the little lullaby, and something about, I mentioned earlier, humor, something about sometimes goofing around and not taking yourself and your craft so seriously. Like earlier, that answer about freelancing, I get kind of passionate about that and I get kind of serious, but I'm a very goofy person most of the time. And so I have to kind of tell myself, don't take this so seriously, because that creativity, you watch kids play and they're goofing around most of the time. They're drawing and they're making little noises and they're dancing while they draw. They're not meticulously like making everything trying to be perfect. And so I think sometimes just telling myself, relax, have fun, because that comes through in what you're creating. It makes a difference. So yeah, I love that. You saying just, I'm going to make the weirdest sound I can.
Yeah.
Real quick, it reminds me of a story. I went to the Inside Outside retreat. This is the saxophone retreat that is over at the Victor Wooten Center for Music and Nature, just outside of Nashville. I went there in 2019, and Victor talked about this one thing. He was there the first night and then the last day of the camp. It's 6 days. And he said something really cool. He goes, this was for his bass camp. He was telling the story, the saxophonist saying, I had this bassist was like trying to impress everyone and play everything so awesome. And he finally goes, all right, this next chorus, they had a whole band playing behind him and everyone's taking turns doing a solo on bass. He's like, just show me the worst you can play. I want to hear the absolute worst you can play. And he goes, the crazy thing was everyone's personalities came out. Like they were, the solos objectively were worse, of course, just blah, 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 you know, but like the humor and the quirkiness and the personalities just blossomed. And it's like, now if you can somehow take that personality and bring it into what's going to work musically, but keep that personality there, that's going to capture people. And so I love you talking about, I'm just going to make the weirdest sound I can. Because I bet you've done that. And then you're like, you know what? That started off kind of goofy. That's pretty awesome. Like, I bet you've had those experiences where it turns out being something you can actually use. And it's started as a germ of something completely ridiculous. That's so cool.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's just one of the ways I kind of trick myself into being a little more free. Yeah, I'm with you. I take it very seriously. I mean, this is what I want to do with my life, and I have a family to support, and so like nobody is more serious about it than me. But at the same time, I get so locked up in my intensity sometimes that I do have to just kind of be like, hey, you know what? You're making video games, man. Like, just enjoy it. You know, enjoy it. Yeah, so I try to do that.
The yellow-headed parrot from the tropical jungles of Yucatan. Wave to the folks, Polly. Romeo, the rose-breasted cockatoo from the interior of Australia. Hello, Romeo.
A little way up the river, there's another fisherman, the great blue...
So I did want to ask you about another thing. As someone who's currently on the grind for my first kind of like big break in the industry, I get told a lot, you need to focus on either being a sound designer or a composer. And it's very important if you're applying for jobs, blah, blah, blah. But one of the reasons I look up to you is because you're very much both. I mean, you obviously are a very well-educated musician and you play saxophone and you love composing, but you also do the whole bit. I've seen a lot of your sound design work and it's really excellent. So, I mean, how did, and you even refer to yourself as a composer, sound designer. So you obviously love doing both. So can you tell me a little bit about how that's played out in your career? And do you have any advice for people who are on the hunt now as far as like how they should handle that?
Absolutely. It's a great question. So I do enjoy both. I do consider myself to be both. So a couple things. One is the first actually back further than that, the first freelancing job I got was sound design and music. I was in charge of everything audio related for that Nintendo DS project. And in that project, I was very much just flying by the seat of my pants. I didn't know how to do sound design. I was just, and my client was very, I don't want to say like he didn't care about the quality bar, but he was like, this is great. This is good. And I think he may have kicked back like a few of my sounds, but most of the time he was just like, yeah, that works. I hear it. Great. And so I was just like, okay. And I was very, I was used to doing the music side. I was not used to doing the sound design part. And then when I got the Funimation job, that was another requirement. Hey, you got to do sound design and you have to do music. At that job, I worked with Dwayne Deering, who is a sound designer, composer, an actor. Really awesome dude. We were a 2-man team for the entire special features and trailer department in Funimation. I learned so much from him. He was just a gold mine of sound design. He knew a lot more about it than I did. And so, and not trying to sound braggadocious about this, but, and he would even say at the time, he was like, you're a better composer than I am. And he was a better sound designer than I am. So we kind of helped each other and taught each other different things. So I learned a tremendous amount from him on sound design approaches and tools and what to listen for, what to do. And so for me, it quickly became, I mean, just my first 2 jobs were like both one freelancing, one being in-house. You got to do both. And then when I got to NetDevil after Funimation, same thing. It was, we need you to write the music and we need you to do sound design. And it was a necessity of the job. I just had to learn it. Now I've gotten better and better, and I appreciate your kind words, by the way. Thank you on the sound design. Sound design was definitely a afterthought. It wasn't something like, ooh, I want to do this. But the more I've learned about sound design, and the more I've learned just in general about signal flow, the more I see there's a lot of carryover to producing a great sounding musical track and producing a cool sound effect. And also there's a lot of carryover in how you have your DAW session set up, and how you're having all your flows go through the various chains for music and for sound design. When I did Funimation and working with Dwayne, you know, he taught me a lot of this stuff, because I would do things like I'd have a trailer, I'd have sound, 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 and I would have nothing in between. And so he started saying, you know, all of your sounds are fine for what you've done, but there's no anticipation, there's no lead up, there's no tail for certain things. And he started showing me, treat sound design the same way you would a musical track, where you're building up the tension, you're releasing it, and then you have an anticipation again, you have a turn, something change, you have a texture change, all those type of things that we do with our you know, compositions and our productions, changing voices and on octaves, changing instrumentation, doing all that with sound design. And that really opened my eyes to where I didn't know how much I was growing. But then after I left Funimation, there was someone who came after me and they said, hey, will you review some of my trailers? And I listened to it. And for the first time in my career, that was maybe about 4 years in, I heard exactly what Dwayne was saying about my early sound design. I heard in his saying, well, I'm hearing islands of sound, but I'm not hearing anything leading up and down. And so the advice I would give to someone who is a musician, a composer, who's trying to bring, you know, go into sound design is treat it like atonal music. Atonal, you're not having to worry about what key I'm in and what my progression is, but you are worrying about, am I giving you the same sonority over and over of ching, 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 ching? Well, that's really annoying. Please stop. You know, that type of thing. Am I building up a cadence, a progression of sounds like you would with chords into this moment? Am I doing any space to allow the sound design to breathe like a composition would? If you start thinking about it the same way, it doesn't seem so foreign, and you start seeing all of the parallels between the two disciplines, because they're very, very, very closely related, in my opinion. One last thing I'll say about sound design is, even just, you know, like if you're writing an orchestral piece, you have the whole ensemble. Most of the time, unless you're making very defined choices, you're not going to have everything in the lowest register just blah, 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 playing super low. It's going to be super muddy. It's going to be cloudy. It's not going to be defined. And so unless you're going for that sound, it's going to be kind of weird. So a lot of times you want a low, a mid, and a high component to that ensemble. You want the same thing to your sound design. If all your sound design is super low, it's going to be muddy. It's going to lack definition. But if you have it spread across the spectrum, like a big, nice chord and a full ensemble, it's going to have that depth and that richness and detail that you're looking for. The other thing was, besides it being a necessity, is I very quickly learned, you know, if I'm only a composer, I get this many jobs. Mm-hmm. If I'm only a sound designer, I get that many jobs. If I do both, I get this many jobs, a little bit more. And so there's a logistical reason behind it too. So
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
yeah, I hope that's helpful. But I mean,
No,
the
that's
advice would
good.
be just and to do what you and I did at the beginning of this, listening and deconstructing sounds and trying to recreate them. It's a wonderful exercise. So yeah, learn about signal flow, treat it like it's a music piece, but not with like traditional notes, and then listen, and try and recreate. That would be my advice.
For me, that's actually why I fell in love with sound design. I am always going to be writing music, but I decided to actually like really pursue sound design because I found out it really is just like writing a little mini song.
Yeah.
Especially when you're complementing music, you really are in the same way you would play in a band. You really want to like synergize and work together and stay out of the way when you need to and pop in when it's time. There's cues, there's a
Yeah.
dance to it, and I actually really genuinely enjoy that. And
That's
in
awesome.
the same way, like just one flick of the pickups could ruin your guitar tone. Like there's something about just picking the right choice for the sound that's needed. So I do really enjoy that. And I'm glad to hear that you also think about it musically too. Are working in a home studio, and correct me if I'm wrong, but even your work for Unbroken, is that in your studio as well at home?
Yeah, it's all right here.
Okay, cool. Actually, right now I can hear my baby crying in the background. So the reason I'm asking is because you have kids, you have a dog, you have activity in your house. How are you able to make that work, especially when you have deadlines? I'm sure there's times where recording is not as optimal for you. So what can you tell me a little bit about how you manage that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first off, so this house is about 1,900 square feet. And this was the formal dining room that we don't use as a dining room at all. It had French doors over here, glass French doors that were 9 foot. And then on this other wall, it had a doorway to the kitchen, like right by where like the laundry room is and the pantry, and there's the fridge. And there's lots of hard floors. And so when we were looking at this house, considering to buy it, everything about the house was great. But I stood in this room, and of course, it's an empty house. It's always louder when there's nothing, to absorb the frequencies and the reflections. And with those doors, I could hear everything. And I'm like, I don't know if this is going to work. And this is a shout out to my father-in-law and to my dad, because I am so not handy. I mean, I can swing a hammer, I can saw and everything like that, but like I don't have the know-how. And so both my father-in-law and my dad came over multiple times, especially my father-in-law, and we insulated 2 of the walls with the highest insulation we could find, and then reframed so we have a full-body door instead of the French doors, framed in another door completely. So we just have one door here. And then, of course, you can see some of the, I've got the, what brand is this? Oh, yeah. GIK, GIK or GIK acoustics. I've got 6 of those panels around. I've got bass traps. And so with all that done, I can play my saxophone and be doing like upper range, loud, high playing. And my kids' bedrooms are not that far out from the door of my office. And my wife has been like, yeah, it's not waking them up. And if I sit in there while they're sleeping and you're playing, I can barely hear you. And so that's been amazing. So kudos and shout out to my father-in-law and my dad. And I was here to help out with as much as I could. And so that's one way we handle it. The other thing is this wall right behind where you are is the laundry room. And so my wife is super gracious and like, hey, you about to record something? Because like if the washing machine's going, I can hear like a thud, 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 thud. Now, fortunately, I don't have to record all that often. But, if I do, she just coordinates with me. I say, I'm going to be doing this right now. and we make it work. So
That's awesome.
otherwise, my oldest son is special needs. He's a 10-year-old. Mentally, he's more like a 5-year-old. So we do have to work with him, because if my door is shut, my youngest understands I'm not going to mess with dad. He's busy. My oldest, though, open the door and be like, hey. And like he thinks everything's a party. And especially if I'm on a Zoom call, he'll be like, hey. And he starts waving and everything. And I'm like, hey, I'm in a meeting right now. And everyone's laughing, and he just doesn't want to stop. So we do have to coordinate him a little bit. But otherwise, we make it work. And I've been able to record saxophone in here. Most recently, you may or may not have seen. Oh no, you did, because you commented on it. I got to do saxophone work for Jonathan on the remake of Seventh Guest, the VR version of that.
But old man Stauff is waiting there. Crazy, sick, and mean.
That was super fun. And by the way, I didn't even tell Jonathan this, but and I'd love to tell something about Jonathan here in just a second. I'm not going to try to attempt his last name, John Vintergarden. I might be butchering that. Apologies, Jonathan, if you're listening to this. But I'll tell you a cool story about Jonathan in just a second. But real fast, for those that haven't heard the music for Seventh Guest, all my saxophone playing, he said, the direction I want you to go is very subtone, very like, you think Twin Peaks, Angelino Badalamenti. If you think of a couple other styles, just very subdued, not like loud, brash, full, bluesy saxophone. And that was my first time recording my horn since getting our new puppy. And I was like, I don't know how she's going to react to this, because she's a barker, man. And she didn't even notice. Like, I was in here and I had everything closed and I'm playing very subtone. And my wife goes, yeah, I think she looked up and was like, whatever, and went back to sleep. So fortunately, she did not bark. Real quick, a story about Jonathan that's really awesome is he and I met, I don't know how many years ago, on social media, Facebook or whatever, one of those groups. And we've been friends for a long time, at least 10 years, because I remember he posted some funny comments about when, for example, I had this huge overhaul of the flower bed. And he was like, I can tell you're a new dad because now you've got all these new dad chores to do. I'm like, you're right. And now my son is 10. And so we've been friends for a decade. And so just another little like gem for your listeners to consider is, so many people are concerned about, I'm going to find my next job. I want to find my next connection. It may be 10 years before that connection makes a job happen, if not longer. And the goal really shouldn't be trying to get a job out of your friends. You should just, make friends. And Jonathan and I always kind of just had the same sense of humor and would talk and kind of connect with each other. And it was never a, hey, what can you do for me? What can you give me? How can I work with you? We just genuinely kind of just clicked and enjoyed each other's company virtually, through Facebook and emails and whatever. And so this last, let's see, I guess it would be summer, he said, hey, I've got a project. I'd love to have you do some saxophone work for me. I was like, sure, it'll be fun to work with you. And he didn't say what it was at first. And the music, from what I've heard, there's hints of George Singer's original score. And if you listen to, and some of the stuff you've heard in trailers, it's not like, oh, this is a direct cover, but there's little montages. So the first thing I heard and worked on, I was like, oh, this is kind of spooky and kind of cool. I wonder what this is for, but I didn't know. And then he sent me the second cue, and I recognized, I was like, oh my God. Like, I was so excited. So it was neat to get to work on that with him. And I know George too, and he's always been super sweet and supportive. So it's neat to be able to add something to that universe, because I played it as a kid and I loved the Seventh Guest and the 11th Hour. So
my background is actually in ministry, so that's like really important to me, that people aren't objects and they're not our sum total worth has nothing to do with our output, at least outside of a business context. And so it's
Yeah.
important to me to connect with people as people. And of course, I always love and appreciate when that can turn into opportunities. But yeah, it's about people. So I like
Yeah,
to hear you say that.
you're right.
It's pretty cool. So I told a friend that you were going to come on and that you had worked at Funimation. And so he was like, listen, you got to ask him, does he know how they created the iconic Super Saiyan sound? I imagine you were
that's
working with some
interesting.
libraries, but do you know how any of those sounds were made?
I don't know, because so here's how it works with Funimation. Well, until very, very recently, I was also doing some freelance work. When you get a new show that's going to be rebranded for the US market, which is what Funimation does, then there's certain elements that are created by the original studio that carry over, like the sound design, in a lot of cases the music, but in some cases not. And then we'll redub, obviously, the actors as we need to. I mentioned the music, sometimes that gets redone. Like I had several situations where a DVD would become a Funimation property, and then for whatever licensing reason or for whatever logistical reason, we don't have the music for the special features and the menus on the DVD. So I would do that. So on the sound design side, most of the time from the episode, well, all the time for the episodes, the sound design was there and provided. So I don't know how they did that, because that was just a sound file that we already had that we worked with. Now, what we would do at Funimation is for a trailer, sometimes I would add sweeteners and additional sound design, or the logo treatment may not have any sound at all. I do all the sound design for that. There's plenty of times I wrote music, and sometimes I would do a cover, emulate or quote the melody of the IP, and sometimes I didn't. I just wrote something that felt appropriate for the trailer, that kind of thing. So, no, I unfortunately do not know how they make that sound. I wish I could tell you the juicy gossip, but I don't know.
Come on, man. Pull some strings. Call some people at Funimation. We got to figure this out. How did they...
I'll get on the phone right now.
yeah. Call up your old boss right now. This is urgent. I can just tell you had a lot of fun with SkateBIRD. And I was reading about the soundtrack, but seems like you had a lot of fun in the creation of it as well. You used some different kind of like samples and made your own loops and things like that. So can you tell me just a little bit about how you created that?
Sure. Yeah. No, SkateBIRD was a blast. So Megan Fox, not the actress, but
I was like,
a programmer that I know. yeah. Yeah, we met on Transformers. No, Megan Fox, not the actress.
When we made Shia LaBeouf quit so you could take his place.
yeah. I'm his stunt double. I'm sorry. You can't see it?
I can see it,
No. So Megan and I met and worked together at NetDevil. She was as I remember, I think I'm saying this right, I think she was just an art, not just, but I think she was an art programmer, basically. Kind of her forte. Very, very smart. Super awesome. And you ever have friends, just a quick little like tangent. I've got friends where like, for whatever reason, I can't remember how we met, but we've just been friends. So in my brain, it becomes like, I've known you forever, type of thing. And that's kind of like Megan. Like, I don't remember how we started talking, became friends, but we did. And so I alluded to earlier in the interview, NetDevil crashed and burned and closed. We all kind of went our different ways. And she started a studio, Glass Bottom Games. And since we were friends, she was like, hey, I need some music. Hey, I need some sounds. I was like, yeah, absolutely. And my thing was, and this could be like a technique for someone to consider who wants to try and get into games, is I remember telling Megan at the beginning, I didn't charge very much at all. And I was like, I'm way more concerned with creating a relationship, creating a partnership, making this work than making a quick buck. I don't care about the money right now. I believe in what you're doing. I believe in what I'm doing. I want to partner up. We're good friends. Let's make this work. And so that's what we did. And so SkateBIRD. One thing I love about working with Megan is she always kind of pushes me in directions I never expect to go as an artist. The game right before, we did punk rock mixed with chiptune. The game before that, Hot Tin Roof. So that was Spartan Fist. The game before that was Hot Tin Roof, and we did chiptune mixed with jazz, which trying to make chiptune bass swing, even though it has that don't like that really hard attack, is very challenging. But she always kind of pushes me into like directions where I'm like, this is really hard and unusual, but the end result becomes something cool and fun, and I learned something along the way. Well, she did the same thing with SkateBIRD. She's like, I want kind of like a DJ remix. I want samples. I want voiceovers. I want, jazz and hip hop and rap and everything kind of just fused together. And so I went into this with a change of flow, basically. So instead of starting with a blank page and being like, okay, I get to make all the choices. I'm going to write all the harmonies. I'm going to make all the rhythms. I'm going to make all the melodies. Like you alluded to, I'm going to use loops. Some of them are I'm just licensing. Some are things I'm making. I'm going to make this all work. I'm going to create my own parts on top of that and just see what I can do. And it was such a fun thing. It took me about 3 months to figure out the right sound. I would send her little like 20, 30-second clips, and she'd be like, no, this is a little bit too this, a little bit too much of that. And every time just kind of like hone in on that target. And if you listen to the track Bird Moms, that was the first one that she was like, yes. I remember I got the email back from her in all caps. Yes, you found it. This is it. And it was kind of the right mixture of lo-fi, untuned things with tuned things. And just started playing around with it. So it was a lot of fun. But what I would do with each track is once I got Bird Moms done, then it became something where, okay, I kind of have the recipe, but I need to make a whole lot more tracks about this. Let me see. And I just started grabbing any kind of software. I had some funds, thankfully. So, for example, I got Regroover at the time. Regroover is something where if you have a single track drum loop, and then it can split by bands, and you have like the hi-hat pattern, you have the snare, you can have the toms, you can have the kick, and maybe the cymbals, depending on what's going on in the information. And you can go and you can change certain things, isolate only certain spots of it, even create almost like a MIDI trigger of things. I use that a lot. And then I also started using, I used a whole bunch of Logic Sampler. So I would bring loops in and then make little splices of things. And sometimes I would pick things that weren't even like right after, not the transient, not like the snare hit, but right after it, this kind of like cool echo. And I would put some filters on it, some delays and reverbs, and I would play it in a certain way, and it became this like dancing texture. I did that a whole bunch. And then it was all about just writing and trying to, like you said earlier, making a weird sound and getting out of your own way. There's a lot of that. Like, because as I wrote songs, I would have like, I remember one time I had like 5 to 10 songs. So I was like, I feel really good about these. And I started to get worried. Is the well dry? What else can I bring out of this? I have this many more tracks to write. And sometimes I would just sit there and be like, I'm not sure what to do. And I'd almost like forget about it and just like start jamming out to something as I just have a loop going. And then the song would come out of that jam, almost just not thinking about it and just having fun and just creating. And then I'm going to give a shout out to my wife really quick, Sarah. There's one song, Dania does the science. And I was like, I don't know where to go with this. I was so struggling. This is late. This is song. The first soundtrack had 34 songs on it. I think wow. Dania Does the Science was like song number, I don't know, like 28, 29. As far as like the number created, not necessarily on the track, on the track listing. I was late in the process and I was tired. I was like, I don't know where to go with this. And she was like, Danny, as a scientist, and I had a little bio for each little bird, each little character in the game. I was like, yeah, she's a scientist. And my wife goes, what if like you just sampled printers that then all of a sudden became like your drums? It's not like normal drums. It's like printers doing weird things. I'm like, let's try it. And so I grabbed a bunch of printer samples and like changed them, edited them, and put them in. And I had the song written, I kid you not, about an hour later. I was like, it's done. That was the spark I needed. Just go off in this weird direction using printers, just straight up printers in a track. Awesome. As far as how to make SkateBIRD, it was a whole bunch of experimentation. I knew going in, I couldn't use my traditional method of, I'm going to write all the harmonies, write all the melodies. And I also knew that I would have to figure out ways to take disparate loops and samples from all different creators and my own. I hired two of my musician friends, John Robert Madsen, trumpet, fantastic composer, amazing trumpet player, and my former boss, Adam Gill, on electric bass for two of the tracks. A wonderful bassist. And I had them play, and then everything else, I just spent the time to try and make it. And there are two barometers real quick that I can tell you. One is if I was bobbing enough in my chair, I was like, okay, I'm getting somewhere. And then I would show it to my wife, who we always joke around as she's my not so silent partner of my business. And if she was bobbing her head, okay, I've reached the first threshold. And then my youngest son, if I played it for him and he was bobbing his head, I'd be like, okay, now I'm going to send this over to Megan. And we're going to see what she says. And most of the time, we'd be like, yeah, this is great. Or she would have small critiques. But really, I kind of just passed it through my wife, my youngest son, and then Megan. And it worked out. So it was so much fun.
The kid test works, man. I'm
it does.
In the game right now. One of my kind of like guiding words is wonder. And so I try to play a lot of the music for my kids, and it's just fun to watch them and see if this kind of creates that feeling in them. But that's so cool, man. The printers thing, that's great. I love that's a great example of the fusion of just sound design and music working together. Particularly hip hop is really cool for that kind of stuff. I don't know if you ever listened to Introducing by DJ Shadow, but it was like one of the very first albums ever entirely composed of samples. It is insanely good, and it's like taking you to a dream world, but it's all just these different, sometimes dissonant, sometimes perfectly melodic, but it takes you somewhere. So I really enjoy, and I don't think you get a lot of that in gaming music much, maybe a little more so these days. So it's very cool to hear that you had a lot of fun doing that. I really like that. Nathan, thank you Nate, Nate, thank you so much for coming on the show, man. I really appreciate it. I actually have a lot more to ask you, so maybe I'll have to have you come on again, but I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Busy, so I thank you for taking the time to come on my podcast. It's I don't mean to scare you, but we do have dozens of listeners, so yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you, Cole. I mean, I really appreciate it. I was very flattered that you asked me, and I would love to do it again. So
cool.
Let's schedule a follow-up, a part 2.
I won't try to cram everything into this one then. I'd definitely love to do a part 2. Hey, thank you so much again for listening. I really enjoyed that conversation. I hope you did too. If you like what you were hearing, definitely check out more of Nate's work. I'll have the links in the description, but you can go to his site, madsenstudios.com, where you can find all sorts of really cool stuff that he's worked on. And do not sleep on that free sound library from Zach that we found earlier. Again, links will be in the description. Definitely download that. I am already looking for ways that I can try to incorporate that into my sound design. And the last thing I want to bring up before I send you on your merry way down the wide, wonderful paths of life is I myself am also open to work, and I'm open to work right now. I'm ready to start today. So if you need a sound designer and an experienced composer for your indie project, or heck, if you want to hire me to work at your AAA studio, I am down. Let's talk. Let's talk about it. But with all of that being said, thank you so much for listening. I genuinely appreciate it. This is all just a labor of love because I love sound design. I do have just one quick little favor. If you wouldn't mind just dragging that little finger over to the like button or the subscribe button or look, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, share, tell with your friends, send it to your mom. And if your mom's like, I don't like game audio, you say, shut up, mom, and just try it out. You're going to like it. It's really fun. All right, just joking. Have an excellent week, everybody. It was fun hanging out, and I'll see you next time on Audio XP.